entered in 1970, okay, as a 13-year-old young man, this may not mean anything. I think you guys know movies, so you'll know this. Father O'Malley by Bing Crosby, Bells of St. Mary, Going My Way. That's what I went into seminary to do. I went to go be Father O'Malley. And I came out, and I was ordained in 1988, and that world didn't exist. And I spent a good part of my ministry trying to recreate that world. Even took a parish by the name of St. Mary's that had a school and brought nuns, was trying to bring nuns there to come staff it, Anglican nuns. Everything I'm now going to say to you about this is counterintuitive to everything in my story and may dovetail with a good part of yours, I think. But it will be a different language structure. It'll be a different dynamic, but if you can cross the tracks, I'm going to use that image today, if you can cross the tracks, you might be able to say, that's got some merit. I think you might be able to do that. The image here is the tracks. I'm a big train guy, and so I'm fascinated by trains. People think I'm a little nuts about it, but I am, and I'm particularly fascinated at the points of intersection. How, particularly in Europe, when you're at these amazing train stations and they're crossing, well, these trains are coming into Central Station and they're crossing the tracks and they miss each other, but they're coming in on the same line. That's kind of where we're at in the church. We have a number of points of intersection. So that's the image I want to leave with you today. So the present landscape, you can read all this. I'm going to send this to you. Here's what you need to know about this. Go back one. There we go. A century ago, 90% of the world in the West was Christian. If you don't know that, that's the number, 9 out of 10. It shifted, by the way. The landscape of Christianity is not in the West, it's in the global South, where I serve. I happen to be the assistant bishop of the Diocese of Zanzibar in the Anglican province of Tanzania. And so the questions of evangelism, and I was listening to the guys who were talking about their reflections in Uganda yesterday, put it on steroids, and you may get an idea of kind of what it's like there. It's very different. Where I serve in the Diocese of Zanzibar, it's 99% non-Christian. Only 1% of the population is Christian. That's an exception in the global South. So where I am is actually much like the rest of the world. Okay? So the changing face of Christendom is what you all are kind of struggling with. That's what I heard yesterday. Okay? And now, of course, that's the key, isn't it? The changing face of Christendom, because we all entered the church thinking we're going to be in Christendom, that the world and the church actually had at least a symbiotic relationship. And now we found out what? We don't, except nobody told us. So what you need to know is that Islam is the fastest growing religion on the face of the planet. So that's something you need to be really clear about, what you're up against. And then the other piece is the knowns, you know about those guys. And they're not just in the United States, they're everywhere. They're particularly in Europe. And they're the second fastest growing group in the world. Not in the United States, in the world. So this is where we are. People are getting off the train. They're getting off the train in droves. And this is the Christian train. And they said it was a nice ride for a while, but it's not pertinent. It's too slow. It doesn't go where I need to go. I want faster transportation. I'll take a jet. I'll take a supersonic train. People are getting off the train. They see our train, the traditional train, is way too slow. So we need a new ecclesial model because the renewed efforts for evangelization have been well placed. So please don't be offended by what I'm now going to say, because you all used this term yesterday. But remember, I come from a different place, so it's not an offense to you. I think this concept of saving the lost is half the problem. As soon as you tell somebody that they're lost, you've now excluded them. You've left them out. What we're dealing with really, when you take those statistics to heart and you look at where you're serving, you're trying to find the missing. That's what you're really trying to do. You're trying to find the missing. And being missing, if you've ever had that experience, is all those things that we know people are going through. Alienation and loneliness and all the things you talked about with the gangs. And it's all about being missing. It's about not being found on the map. That's a lot different than being lost. And so if they're God's children, they're missing. They're not lost. Lost says you're on the downside. You're the loser. You may not agree with me on that, but if you go into the wild, you'll find out that's actually the case. Are there models we can learn from on this? Yeah, there are. So there have always been ecclesiastical movements of the Spirit that have responded to the missing. What I'm saying today is not new terrain. Okay? What is different is that we seem less able to reinvent them, to recapture what they had and adapt it to a new season, to a new culture. You know this. Some of you talked about monastic spirituality or the what did you call it? The mercy ministries. That comes from the Mendicant orders. Francis of Assisi. You all know the story of Francis, right? What did he do? He stood in the town square and he said, I give you everything I've had in front of the bishop and his father. I give you all the wealth. I give you my name. What's born of the flesh is flesh, and what's born of the spirit is spirit. And he goes out to San Damiano, and he rebuilds the church that's fallen apart, thinking that's really what he's supposed to do, but it was really about rebuilding the spirit of the church. So this experience is not new to the life of the church, and it's not limited to the Roman church or the Anglican tradition or the Reformed tradition. It's just the church. That's one of our problems. We segmented the church, and so now people go, well, which brand? And they don't see that as viable witness. They see that as divided loyalty. Okay. So, again, we all know about Christendom, started the Roman Empire, kind of tooled along until about the 5th century, needed a rebirth. Monasticism came along, that rebirthed the church for a while. Then we had structures. After the 5th century, we have enormous structures being constructed. Some of you know them as dioceses or judicatories, as we call them today. And then you had the religious orders that were not dioceses, that kind of wandered, like Patrick in the Celtic Church. They just kind of wandered and set up shop and evangelized and catechized. And these two models, they paralleled each other. Council of Whitby comes in the 7th century and says, you know what, we need everybody to be under the same style. And of course, they said, well, that was just when they established the date of Easter. That's what it looks like. That's not what's going on. It was about how do we get from universality, where the faith is shared, to uniformity. And that became the problem. Okay, Catholicity is not uniformity. And no offense to you guys in the Reformed tradition, but that's also a misapprehension you guys make about that tradition. And I only know that because I get hit with that all the time. And I said, well, you're just not getting it. Universality is not uniformity. But to be fair, historically, that's what it became. So by the 5th century, and the 6th century, when that happened, dioceses judicatories were powerful. They had money, power, all the things that you associate with it. And religious communities, like Francis, when he comes along in the 11th century, they're on the downside. They're not seen with the same fervor, the same. So what do? They decide they've got to get power. So the monasteries become powerful, as we see that in England. So what did Henry want to do when the English Reformation comes along? Henry wanted to disestablish the monasteries for two reasons. A, they had power, and B, they had money. Okay. So while the monasteries were a sodality and the dioceses were modalities, the monastics said, we need to become like those guys because we're being edged out. We all know what that's like, right? Say, look, I'm on the margins. I got to try to figure out how to get in. So I'll kind of look like those guys a little bit, but we'll adapt it, right? We'll extrapolate. We all do that in the church today. If you read Professor Jenkins from Baylor, The Next Christendom, he writes all about this. So you can read a guy. He has some books for you to read that talk about this. Structures of God's Redemptive Mission by Ralph Winter. You guys all know who he is, I suspect. The Lost History of Christianity, 1,000 Golden Age of the Church, Middle East, Africa, and Asia, and How It Died. Really important. And then this is a book that will make your brain explode, because it's by an Eastern Orthodox guy, Church in the Making, an Apophatic Ecclesiology of Consubstantiality. Say that 3 times fast and you get the book for free. But it's a really important book. Okay? Here's the point, that jurisdictions are modalities. They tend to be static. They are on the part of the structure. Any institution, any structure has one prime mission. What is it? To safeguard the structure and to safeguard the institution. That's its job. Whether it's a hospital, a church, a government, doesn't matter. Any modality is to safeguard the very essence of what it is. Nothing wrong with that. You need structures, but remember, that's their mode of operation. Okay? So what happens is, sodalities get birthed in the church over time. So from the 10th century on, sodalities are birthed in the life of the church, and they constantly come through the cycle of the church. And the church structure goes, yeah, let's try to use those guys, and if we can't use them, let's get rid of them. Okay? So what you have about sodalities that's different is that they're mobile and deployable. They're not settled. Okay? They engage where the church structures are unwilling to go. Mission societies were sodalities. Why? Because the diocesan guys, the parish guys, the judicatory guys, didn't want to get on a boat and go across the ocean and put their life on the line. I mean, I understand that, but that's what they didn't want to do. But those guys want to do that, so let's let them go do that and go, yay, we're off of sodalities. Make sense? So that's how the church evolved. And so what happened a lot for these guys, these wayfarers, if you will, I like to use the image of, like, you're in the wilderness. I like to use the image of journey. We're all pilgrims. These guys went on a different pilgrimage. Went on a way different pilgrimage. Where everybody's going left, they went right. And here's the problem. They didn't really need a bishop and an overarching authority system to say, go do it. They were convinced, the Spirit led them, they had a vision, they went. And they put their lives on the line. Sodalities are important to the life of the church until they threaten the institution. That's the problem, okay? Ooh, how'd that happen? So, I want to say this, what the institutional church, which obviously I have some representation of given the outfit today, so I'm not an idiot. I know from whence I come. And I do understand that much of what I'm saying is counterintuitive to look in this way, but it's only based on 31 years of ordained ministry. The point is this. The church has never learned, the institutional church has not learned that modality and sodality are not mutually exclusive. They actually can be complementary, and what we really need at this point, where we are at the crossings, we need a hybrid. We need a hybrid model. It's not either or, it's both end. And that's really hard for us to get a handle on. So, here's some ideas for you. I'm going to give you an example of a hybrid that I'm associated with. So I talked about evangelism before, and none of you threw anything, so that's a plus. So here's another one for you. Get rid of parish. Don't worry about being in a parish anymore. It doesn't mean anything to anybody. Okay, first of all, where's Michael? Right? Parish is a geographical boundary that comes from the Church of England. That's where parishes come from. And in England, they mean something very different than what they mean here. So when you talk about a parish, it's not real. And I always called myself, and still do, I'm a parish priest first and foremost, because my parishioners. But my parishioners don't come from a geographical area. They're all over the globe. So we had to find the group. The group of guys that I work with is called the Anglican Union. We'll talk about that in a minute. We said we need a different model. So we came up, we adapted Oratory. Oratory is simply a place to gather and pray. We didn't invent it. Philip Neri invented it in the 16th century. Let's talk about him in a sec. Oratories are places to pray. That could be inside, that could be outside, it could be sacred space, it could be secular space. It's a great leveler. It's a great leveler. What I like about it is, when you use the word church or parish, people have the association of a building like this. Some of you guys who have been in storefronts and in rough places and coffee houses, if you use the word church, people walk in and go, there's a whole set of expectations. This isn't a church. So we have words like parish and church that build in baggage that people go, I was looking for that. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm out. So we went to Oratory because it's a great leveler. And it could be at a rec center, it could be at a coffee house, it could be at a school, it could be a blues bar, it could be in a traditional church. It doesn't really matter. It's a place to pray. why that's important, and look, I'm Father O'Malley, going my way. This is not easy for me. The word church, you all know this, comes from the Greek kyriakonos, which means things belonging to the Lord. I mean, physical things that belong to the Lord, not people, the stuff of the church, the chalice, the vestments, they were kyriakonos. And that word becomes in the Old English kirch, adapted, and eventually becomes kirch to church. So when you're talking about church, you're talking about physical things that that we say belong to God. It's the vestments, it's the chairs, it's the whole bit. If you don't have that, what's the point of the term, right? So the other problem is parish. It comes from the Greek para, adapted to the Old French, and that's a term people are increasingly put off by. And there's a whole bunch of sociological and painful reasons that have come out because of the scandals that people don't want to be associated with anybody who's a parish priest, right? So we went to Oratory. Maybe not. There we go. So it's not a new concept. It started out in the 16th century, a guy named Philip Neri, who founded what's called the Oratorians in the Roman Catholic Church, but it's not just in the Roman Catholic Church. Anglicans and Lutherans have them as well. We'll talk about that in a sec. It was started out as a room to have Bible study and prayer because a bunch of lay people in Rome in the 16th century wanted to have Bible study and prayer in the midst of all the uproar of the Reformation, and they were told by the bishop they couldn't do it. So they went and rented a room, and they had Bible study and prayer. Sound like anybody you know? Okay? And that's how it started. Philip Neri was a layman. He wasn't a priest. Matter of fact, the institution said, if you're going to keep doing this, you have to become a priest, or else not going to let you do it anymore. And why they wanted to become a priest? Because they wanted to control him. Okay, it didn't happen so well, fortunately. Not only in the Roman Church, in the 17th century, Nicholas Ferrer, who's a deacon in the Anglican Church, establishes Little Giddings. Some of you may know the poem Little Giddings by T.S. Eliot, part of the four quartets. It's based on this. And what happened was, you all know, Cromwell became the Lord Protector of the realm and outlawed the Anglican tradition in England. It was utterly illegal to have a Book of Common Prayer. You couldn't worship as an Anglican, and you could not be an Anglican cleric. So he's got a family estate out in the Midlands, Little Giddings. It becomes a place that anybody who was Anglican can come pray and come live and come serve. Because in Oratory, what happens is, establishment finds out, what do you think they did? Read the poem Little Giddings, you'll find out. Okay. All of these were birthed when the church was in crisis. Here's the point. The church is in crisis. So we argue there's a need for another oratory. What we're trying to do is reclaim the idea of a lost sodality. That modalities are going to continue on. They don't need my help. I mean, they do need my help. I'm part of a modality. I'm part of a diocese, so it does need my help. But part of what our efforts are is to try to decentralize and try to make it self-sufficient. Okay, so I do understand that. So what happened in 2018 is a bunch of Anglican bishops, seeing all these bubbles bursting, okay, came together and said, we need to organize something different. And so what they organized was an international confraternity of oratories, an international confraternity, a brotherhood and sisterhood of people to come together and pray all over the world. There's a bunch in the U.S., India, Africa, Latin America, okay? And it's open to anybody. You're in the Anglican Communion. We even have associate members who aren't Anglican, who say, that's the right idea. So the Anglican Union has a very real purpose. That's the purpose: propagate the gospel. That's it. And that happens in three ways, three charisms. And so they said, tell us what the three charisms are going to be. Number one, that we're going to be rooted in the historic faith as expressed in the scriptures and the principles of the Book of Common Prayer, because we're Anglicans. So you got to have a rooting. So scripture and the prayer of the church, okay? Secondly, service. So prayer, charism 1. Charism 2, service. I don't mean service as in, we're at the bar. Nothing wrong with being at the bar, don't get me wrong. I'm talking about very specific service, the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. Every oratory is grounded in that. Key. Thirdly, and most importantly, ecumenical spirituality for the work of unity. that we're committed to working together with other Christians under the banner of propagating the gospel, asking people to journey with us. Why? Because going forward, we believe if those numbers are correct and the population is diminishing in terms of Christians, therefore the resources are going to diminish. As the resources diminish, you're going to have less ability to execute the work of the gospel propagated. But if we pool resources and pool vision, we'll have an opportunity to actually be more expansive than if we just operate by our own silos. So that's what that spirituality is about. There's 6 principles for ecumenical spirituality. One is, obviously, first and foremost, it's based on John 17. Okay, I don't need to explain that to you guys. Why is that important? Because the world's fragmented. Second principle, ecumenical spirituality seeks to create relationships that are patterned after the Trinity. If the church operated with each other in a more Trinitarian context, the church ecumenically would be a lot healthier than it is. Instead, we operate by silos, and we're going to shoot missiles at each other because we're all about sheep stealing. It's actually not sheep stealing, it's just sheep trading. We just trade. Nobody's stealing anybody. Just trade. It's like the Major League trading deadline. Principle 3, ecumenical spirituality offers the wider church a foundation of mission that's horizontal and vertical. That's really important. And secondly, you've got to establish kingdom structures. So you need both. Human structures, kingdom structures. That's the third, and you'll get this. How do you do that? Establish dynamic worshiping and missional communities. Spiritual formation is the foundation of all that you do, which is catechesis, and social ministry is a constitutive dimension to how you gather. It's not an option, it's a constitutive dimension to who we are. That's how the oratories work. Principle 4, that ecumenism is foundational to how we gather. That's when people come to where your oratory is, you guys say, we're in this to work with others. We're not in this to say, this is our silo and let's all be happy together. Okay? Fifth principle, ecumenical spirituality seeks to offer modalities and sodalities, a different way of thinking about the church. That's really probably the hardest thing to get across to people. It's not the Preservation Society. Most of us belong to judicatories that are about the Preservation Society because we're desperately afraid of going out of business. Well, if we continue that mindset, we will be out of business. That's the problem. The very nature of this oratory system is to try to widen the base, not narrow the base. Sixth principle, ecumenical spirituality is grounded in the expression of the Eucharist. I know that means different things to different people. The ecclesiology's got to be Eucharistic in that it's Catholic, it's uniting, it's calling people to become bread broken for the world and blood poured out for the world. Okay, that's pivotal. Why is this? This is an opportunity to engage in a responsive listening. You guys talked a lot about that while I was here. At least that's what I heard you saying anyway. To lively engage with humanity in a way they want to be engaged with. Okay? Right? They really do. That's, I mean, who said, somebody was saying that they were in the collar and they said, would you pray for me? People want that connection, even though they don't know what to do with it. Okay? So that's a way to engage them. It's also a way to follow the Holy Spirit. To go down the route of a sodality takes a lot of faith. I speak from experience. I mean, I left every traditional dynamic I know to join the Anglican Union. Okay? But I believed it was in God's time. Because why? Because Scripture tells me when the time is, and that the time is now. When you read all about the fragmentation of the church, and you look at Revelation, it's like, how is that not now? Somebody tell me how it's not now. What do we have? We have, since the liturgical reforms of the 60s, I'm going to use that as a, kind of put a pin in it. What do we've had? We've had confusion, contention, and conflict. That's all we've had. Okay, and we've had, you may call it revisionism, liberalization, etc. Maybe so, but all it's created is confusion, contention, and conflict that have been, hold on to this one, this is a board of serious people. It really is. Like, why do I need to come to that when I have that in my own family or I have it at my workplace? I don't need to come to your place for more of it. You know, so this is kind of nutty. We believe, the bishops from Africa and here in the U.S., we believe that we're going to affect the course of the church at its core values because we have a model that already did. Philip Neri did that Oratories are still part of that church. There's only 80 in the world in the Roman church. But here's the deal. They live their charism and they don't deviate because it works. And so we believe we can change the values of the church. Will I be alive to see how it shakes out? Probably not, because I'm an old guy. But my son will, and hopefully his kids. If this works, it'll be another Reformation, I think.